An empty velvet box, a missing emerald, and one woman standing in the doorway, already condemned. Danielle Carter came to the Whitlock estate to clean rooms, not to uncover a family's most dangerous secret. The matriarch can't remember what happened. Her daughter-in-law needs someone to blame. The estate manager smiles too calmly. And every hallway in that mansion seems to be closing in on the housekeeper. But the truth wasn't stolen. It was hidden, inside a mind beginning to disappear. They searched her room. They offered her money to vanish quietly. But Danielle knows something they don't. The woman they accused of theft may be the only person still protecting the woman they all failed to see. And when Eleanor Whitlock finally remembers, this house will turn on the real thieves.
They called Danielle Carter a thief. The real crime, what everyone chose not to see.
Danielle Carter stood in the doorway of Eleanor Whitlock's bedroom with a breakfast tray in her hands, and she watched a family of millionaires turn and look at her the way people look at a stain. The wall safe hung open. The emerald brooch that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother, worth more than Danielle would earn in 10 years, was gone. So was a signed check for $50,000.
Who else comes in this room?
She didn't ask Danielle. She asked the room, over Danielle's head, like the housekeeper was furniture.
Who else has a reason to be in my mother-in-law's bedroom every single day?
Nobody answered. Nobody had to. The one person who could have ended it right there, the sharp-tongued 72-year-old matriarch in her wing-back chair by the window, said nothing. Eleanor Whitlock was staring at the open safe with an expression Danielle knew better than anyone in that house, better than Eleanor's own son. The look of a woman searching her own mind and finding a locked door. Eleanor couldn't remember, and Danielle was the only living soul who knew why. None of the people pointing their silence at the black housekeeper had any idea that for 8 months she had been keeping the biggest secret in that house. They didn't know what she'd been before she ever picked up a mop for the Whitlocks, or that defending herself, really defending herself, would mean breaking a promise she'd made to a proud old woman on the worst night of that woman's life. 14 months earlier, Danielle Carter had driven up the long gravel drive of the Whitlock estate outside Charlotte with everything she owned in the back of a 2009 Corolla and an 8-year-old asleep against the window. She took the job for 2 reasons, and neither one was the lake view. The school district first, the kind of schools she couldn't have touched on her old salary, and the staff apartment in the basement level, because rent in Charlotte had gotten hungry, and a live-in position meant her daughter Zoe would never again fall asleep in a car in a Walmart parking lot while her mother pretended it was camping. What she didn't put on her application was the 6 years before. 6 years as a certified nursing assistant on a memory care ward, turning patients, tracking medications, learning the difference between a bad day and a bad sign. She'd walked away from that work completely after her own mother died, scrubbed it off her resume the way you scrub something off your hands when you can't stand to look at it anymore. On paper, she was a housekeeper with hotel experience. That's all the Whitlocks ever saw. The interview lasted 11 minutes. Grant Whitlock, the son, 47, a man who'd made a fortune moving shipping containers across oceans and couldn't hold eye contact with his own mother for a full minute, called her Denise twice and didn't notice either time. His wife Celeste didn't interview her at all. Celeste inspected her the way you inspect an appliance. The nanny, a 29-year-old named Marisol Vega, gave Danielle a smile at the staff entrance that first week and said,
"Just so you know how it works here, I handle the children, you handle the dirt."
Danielle bit down on her answer, unpacked Zoe's bottle cap collection onto a basement windowsill, and got to work. She was 3 weeks in when she noticed the first thing wrong in the West Wing. The West Wing belonged to Eleanor Whitlock, and everyone else in the house treated it like a border crossing. Eleanor was the reason there was money at all. She and her late husband had built the company, and she still held 30% of it, along with a will that everyone thought about and nobody mentioned. She was sharp as a paper cut and twice as quick, the kind of woman who could compliment your blouse and remove your spine in the same sentence. Grant flinched around her. Celeste had spent 18 years trying to earn one warm word from her and had collected exactly none. It was the tea first. Eleanor took Earl Grey at 4 o'clock. Every day, 1 sugar, in the blue cup with the chip on the handle, never the good china, which turned out to be its own small story. Clockwork. Except on a Tuesday in Danielle's 3rd week, Eleanor rang for her 4 o'clock tea at 4, and then rang again at 4:40 and asked for her 4 o'clock tea, and there was nothing in her face that knew she'd already had it. The chipped blue cup was still sitting on the tray table, still warm. Danielle said nothing. She made a second pot. One incident is nothing. Everybody misplaces an afternoon sometimes, and Danielle knew that better than anyone in that zip code. But then it was the reading glasses in the refrigerator, tucked next to the butter like they'd been put there with intention. Then Eleanor calling the gardener by the name of a man who, the cook mentioned in passing, had retired 9 years ago. Then a Thursday, when Eleanor stopped halfway down her own hallway, a hallway she had walked for 40 years, and stood there with one hand on the wainscoting, very still, very careful, a woman who did not currently know which direction her bedroom was. Danielle watched it happen from the linen closet doorway, and her whole chest went cold, because her hands already knew this. 6 years of this. The repetition, the misplaced objects, the freezing in familiar places. She used to fill out that checklist for a living, on a ward in a building she still couldn't drive past. The family, during those same weeks, saw nothing. Grant visited his mother's wing maybe twice a month, and kept the visits short and cheerful and blind. Celeste avoided the West Wing entirely. Being around Eleanor made her feel small, and she had enough of that in her life already. Marcus Boone, the estate manager who handled Eleanor's household accounts and called her the Duchess with a wink, saw Eleanor every week. If he noticed anything, he never mentioned it. Not to the family, anyway. So it fell to the housekeeper. It always falls to somebody like the housekeeper. Danielle started small, and she started quiet. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She reminded herself of that daily, the way you press on a bruise. But she couldn't watch a woman drown in her own house either. The day's date, written large on the kitchen notepad in the West Wing, casual, like it was for deliveries. Eleanor's medications laid out in a weekly organizer Danielle bought with her own money and labeled vitamins. The routine shifted, a little at a time, so the important things happened in the mornings, when Eleanor was clearest, and the flexible things after 4, when the fog liked to roll in. She never announced any of it. She just quietly built handrails into an old woman's day and let her believe the house had gotten easier to live in. For a while it worked. Nobody knew. Not the family, not even Eleanor herself, not fully. Then, one night in late October, Danielle got caught. It was almost 11. She had slipped into the West Wing study to update the notebook, a plain leather journal she'd started keeping where Eleanor could find it, filled with gentle anchors in a handwriting Eleanor would soon trust more than her own memory. What was said today? What was decided? Who visited? Danielle was bent over the desk, pen in hand, when the lamp in the corner clicked on. Eleanor Whitlock sat in the armchair in her dressing gown, awake, upright, and utterly lucid. Her eyes went from Danielle's face to the notebook, to the medication organizer visible in the open drawer, and Danielle watched her do the math of the last 2 months in about 4 seconds. On her good nights, Eleanor's mind was still ablade.
How long? Not a question.
Ma'am?
Do not ma'am me at 11 o'clock at night in my own study. How long have you known?
Since the tea, the second pot, in September.
Silence. Eleanor's hands were folded in her lap, perfectly composed, but the knuckles had gone pale, and Danielle recognized that too. the enormous, exhausting effort of a proud person holding still. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice was low and even and worse than shouting.
Who have you told? My son? His wife? That Boone man who smiles at me like I'm a slot machine.
Nobody.
Why not?
Eleanor leaned forward, and for the first time, something cracked in her voice. Not much. A hairline.
You could have. You could sell that to any one of them and buy yourself real leverage in this house. Celeste would put you in charge of the whole staff for it. So why not?
Danielle looked at this fierce, terrified woman and felt her own history rise in her throat. A history she had no intention of sharing. Not that night. Not with anyone. Her hand drifted to her apron pocket, to the old teaspoon she carried there, the one that had belonged to her mother, and she pressed her thumb against the worn silver until it hurt.
Because it's yours to tell, not mine.
Eleanor stared at her for a long moment. Then the matriarch of the Whitlock fortune, a woman who had negotiated against shipping conglomerates before Danielle was born, did what she always did with power. She reached for the checkbook on the side table.
Name your price, whatever you want, and you will tell no one.
Danielle should have said yes. God knows the number in her bank account said yes. Instead, she heard herself say the thing that would change both of their lives and put her directly in the path of everything that was coming.
I don't want your money, Mrs. Whitlock. I want a promise.
Eleanor's pen stopped over the checkbook.
A promise.
On your bad days, you'll listen to me. That's it. That's the whole price. When I say the notebook says otherwise, you check the notebook. When I say it's a rest afternoon, you rest. You stay in charge of everything else. Your money, your secrets, your family. But the bad hours, you give to me.
And why on earth would I hand a stranger my bad hours?
Because I'm the only person in this house who's not afraid of you. And you know it.
For a second, Eleanor looked like she might throw the checkbook at her. Then the old woman laughed, one short, startled bark of a laugh, the first honest sound Danielle had ever heard in the West Wing, and closed the checkbook. Danielle would remember that laugh for the rest of her life.
The tea was cold today.
Which was as close to yes as her pride could carry her.
That was the alliance. No contract, no witnesses. A billionaire's mother and a housekeeper, bound together by a secret that could shift a family fortune, sealed at 11 at night over a chipped blue cup. What Danielle built after that night, she built the way she cleaned, quietly, in corners where nobody thought to look. The notebook grew into a system. Every evening she wrote the day into it, who called, what was decided, which stories Eleanor had told and to whom, so Eleanor would never repeat one to the same person and see that flicker of pity cross their face. She labeled the insides of the cabinet doors in the West Wing kitchen. Important signatures and phone calls moved to 10 in the morning, Eleanor's sharpest hour, and the family was told Mrs. Whitlock had gotten particular about her schedule. Nobody questioned it. Eleanor had been particular since 1978. It wasn't smooth, exactly. Some evenings, Eleanor sat with her arms crossed while Danielle wrote, correcting her spelling out loud, or complained that the vitamin organizer made her feel like a woman in a commercial for something embarrassing. Once Eleanor didn't speak to her for a full day over a rescheduled hair appointment, and Danielle spent that whole day half convinced she'd wrecked the entire arrangement over 45 minutes on a Tuesday. She hadn't.
You put too much milk in yesterday. Which meant it was over.
On the bad afternoons, the fog afternoons, Danielle learned to read the weather in Eleanor's face before Eleanor did. A certain slowness around the eyes, the left hand drifting to the pearls at her throat and staying there. On those days, Danielle appeared with tea an hour early,
Rest afternoon, Mrs. Whitlock.
and Eleanor, keeping her promise with visible resentment, rested. And somewhere in there, neither of them could have said exactly when, they started to like each other. It happened through Zoe, which surprised everyone, including Zoe. Danielle had a hard rule. Her daughter stayed downstairs, out of the family's way, invisible, safe. But one Saturday in November, Zoe wandered up looking for her mother and found Eleanor instead, alone at the sunroom table, laying out a deck of cards and struggling, visibly, frighteningly, to remember what game her hands had been about to play. Zoe, 8 years old and constitutionally incapable of minding her business, sat down across from her and told Eleanor she knew gin rummy, that her mother had taught her, and that she probably wasn't very good, so Eleanor would likely win. Danielle arrived 4 minutes later, breathless, apology already leaving her mouth. She had a nervous habit of apologizing in advance, sanding down the world before it could splinter, and Eleanor lifted one finger without looking up from her cards.
The child stays. She's the only person on this property who doesn't let me win.
After that, it was every Saturday. Gin rummy in the sunroom. Zoe's bottle caps spread across the table as betting chips. Occasional disputes about whether a root beer cap was worth more than a Sprite cap. Eleanor counted cards out loud in the way she pretended was teaching, and Danielle recognized as exercise. Butterscotch candies appeared in the dish and stayed there. Zoe started calling her Miss Eleanor and feeding her school gossip, which Eleanor absorbed like foreign intelligence and sometimes followed up on weeks later. Who was this Brianna, and had she apologized yet? Danielle stood in doorways watching an old woman fight for her mind with a deck of cards and an 8-year-old. And more than once, she had to leave the room because it dragged up things she kept buried in that apron pocket with her mother's spoon. But while all of that warmth was growing in the West Wing, something colder was growing in the rest of the house. 3 somethings, though none of them knew about the others. And every one of them, whether they understood it yet or not, was pointed straight at Danielle. Marisol Vega had been running a long, patient project since before Danielle ever arrived. And Danielle had noticed it months ago and filed it away, the way she filed everything. Nothing scandalous, nothing you could name. Just always in the room. Grant's coffee appearing before he asked for it. Little Theo trotted out, adorable, whenever Grant looked stressed. Small reports about the household delivered to him privately, in a voice pitched just for him. Marisol was 29, smart, ambitious, in a house that gave ambition nowhere to go. And she had watched Grant and Celeste's marriage go cool and formal and drawn her own conclusions. She was positioning herself the way you position a chess piece, 3 moves early. Only one thing threatened the project, and it genuinely confused her. The housekeeper. The housekeeper had somehow become the second most trusted person in the house after barely a year, welcome in a wing where Marisol had never once been invited. Eleanor Whitlock asked for Danielle by name. Eleanor Whitlock let Danielle's daughter sit at her card table. In the geometry of that house, whoever had the matriarch's ear held real power, and the woman Marisol had assigned to the dirt was holding it. Marisol started watching Danielle the way you watch a rival. Celeste deserves a fair telling, because Celeste was not evil. She was a woman who had spent 18 years married into a family where her mother-in-law examined her like a purchase Grant had made without consulting anyone. Every Thanksgiving, a small verdict. Every birthday, a thinner smile. She had redecorated that house twice, and Eleanor had called it hotel taste both times, once in front of guests. The rest Danielle picked up in pieces over months, the way staff always do. From the cook, from half a phone call, from the way Celeste's accent slipped when she was tired. Under the silk blouses, Celeste was still the girl from Gastonia whose first husband had left her with a baby and debts, who had promised herself she would never be looked down on again, and who had then married directly into a lifetime of being looked down on by one specific woman. So when Celeste watched the housekeeper walk in and out of Eleanor's wing, laughing sometimes, actually laughing with the woman who had never once laughed with Celeste. Something in her curdled. It wasn't about money. Grant assumed everything was about money. It was the arithmetic of it. 18 years of trying, beaten by 14 months of dusting. And Marcus Boone. Marcus was 44, the estate manager, charming in the way of a man who has practiced it, and he had been handling Eleanor's household accounts for 6 years. He called Danielle Superstar. He remembered Zoe's birthday. He was, by every visible measure, the friendliest person on the property. And he had noticed Eleanor's slipping memory a full month before Danielle ever poured that second pot of tea. He hadn't told a soul. He'd gotten to work. It started small, the way these things do. An invoice for landscaping paid twice. The second payment routed somewhere soft. A vendor that existed mostly on paper. Eleanor had always reviewed her household ledger monthly, line by line, terrifyingly. And now, some months she reviewed the same ledger twice without realizing, and other months not at all, and Marcus adjusted his appetite accordingly. By the time of the card games in the sunroom, he had quietly rerouted a sum well into 6 figures. He wasn't greedy about the pace, he was patient, which is exactly why Danielle scared him. The notebook system was working too well. Eleanor's mornings were sharper, her schedule had structure, and one Tuesday in January, at 10 in the morning, her best hour, Eleanor sat down with her household ledger for the first time in months with a clear head, frowned at a landscaping line, and said, to no one in particular,
Didn't we pay Delgado's in October?
Danielle was dusting the bookshelf. She didn't know a thing about the accounts. But Marcus was standing in the doorway with the mail, and she happened to glance up, and she caught something cross his face. Fast, half a second, gone. Not guilt, calculation. Then the smile snapped back on.
Duchess, you're sharp as ever. That's the winter contract. I'll bring you the paperwork.
He did, and the paperwork looked fine, and Eleanor moved on. Danielle moved on too, mostly. But that night, she wrote one line in her own private notes, the little spiral pad she kept for herself, separate from Eleanor's leather journal.
Delgado's. M's face.
She didn't know what it meant yet. 6 years on a memory ward teaches you how to care for the people who are forgetting. It also teaches you to spot the people who profit from it. By February, the alliance was 8 months old, and the house had settled into a rhythm that almost felt safe. Though in a house like that, safe is just the word for the part before. Because things were stacking up, piece by piece, while Danielle refilled the butterscotch dish and wrote the days into the leather book. Marisol needed the housekeeper's influence broken. Celeste needed somewhere to put 18 years of swallowed humiliation. Marcus needed the one sharp-eyed person near Eleanor's ledgers gone, before the Duchess had too many good mornings in a row. None of them coordinating. None of them even liking each other. All of them pointed at the same basement apartment, waiting, without knowing they were waiting, for a spark. The spark came on a gray Thursday in March, and it came from the person none of them would have predicted, Eleanor herself. It was a bad day. Danielle knew it by 8 in the morning, the slowness in the eyes, the hand at the pearls. But it was worse than the usual fog, the worst she had seen, and it fell on the one morning Danielle wasn't there. Zoe had woken up with a fever, and Danielle spent the morning downstairs with a thermometer and children's Tylenol, starting up the stairs twice to check on Eleanor and turning back twice, because the fever came first. It had to. By the time she came up for good at noon, Eleanor was in her armchair, composed, pleasant, and missing 3 hours. What Eleanor did in those 3 hours, no one saw. And by dinner time, Eleanor herself could not have told you. It had already sunk beneath the surface, whole, like a stone into the lake behind the house. 9 days later, Celeste came upstairs to ask Eleanor to wear the emerald brooch to the company's spring gala. Eleanor went to the wall safe, entered the combination her hand still remembered, and opened it on an empty velvet box. The brooch was gone. The signed $50,000 check she kept behind it, gone. And down in the basement kitchen, Danielle Carter loaded a breakfast tray, straightened her apron with her mother's spoon in the pocket, and rode the service elevator up toward the worst morning of her life. Nobody said the word thief that first morning. Rich families don't. They have quieter instruments. We're not accusing anyone. We just need to understand the timeline. Danielle, you understand we have to ask, in a voice that had already finished asking. Marcus, summoned with his ledgers, put a warm hand on Danielle's shoulder in front of everyone. Superstar, I'm sure this sorts itself out. And Danielle felt the weight of that hand and understood, with a clarity that scared her, that it was not support. It was staging. And Eleanor sat in the wingback chair and said the 11 words that cracked the floor under Danielle's feet. I want to hear Danielle tell me she didn't take it. The room turned. Danielle looked at Eleanor, at the woman whose medication she'd sorted for 8 months, whose worst hours she'd guarded like a soldier, and searched her face for the signal, the code between them, the, I know, play along. It wasn't there. The eyes looking back at her were slow around the edges. The left hand was at the pearls. Eleanor wasn't performing for the family. Eleanor was having a bad day. With the fog rolling in and a hole where the last 9 days should have been, she genuinely did not know whether the housekeeper had robbed her. I didn't take anything, Mrs. Whitlock. Her voice held. Her hands didn't. She put them behind her back. Well, distant, terrible, polite. Someone did. Danielle stood there and felt the shape of it close around her. The only witness who could clear her had a hole in her memory where the truth used to be, and explaining why meant standing in that bedroom and laying it all out in front of the family. The appointment in October, the notebook, the fog. Stripping a proud woman bare in front of the son who'd inherit her company and the daughter-in-law she'd never let close. She could keep her promise, or she could keep her name. She looked at the carpet, and she kept her promise. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed in the basement for a long time, with her mother's teaspoon in her fist. Zoe, still feverish, asked why Miss Eleanor hadn't wanted cards on Saturday. Danielle said Miss Eleanor was tired. Then she went into the tiny bathroom, ran the tap so her daughter wouldn't hear, and let herself shake for exactly 2 minutes. Then she washed her face and started dinner, because it was 6:15 and Zoe hadn't eaten. Upstairs, the house chose sides with ugly speed. Celeste didn't rage. Celeste organized. Within 2 days, she had a private security consultant reviewing staff access logs, and every log confirmed what everyone already believed. The only staff member with daily, unsupervised access to Eleanor's suite was the housekeeper. She presented it to Grant at his desk, folder squared to the edge of the blotter, and when he started to say maybe they should wait, she looked at him until he stopped. 18 years of being hotel taste, and now she was finally the reasonable one in the room. And Eleanor's favorite was the suspect. She was not going to hand that back. Grant worked late, later than usual, later than the work needed. He told Celeste to handle it appropriately, told himself the insurance would cover the brooch, and did not once, go sit with his mother and ask her how she was. If he had, he might have noticed in an evening what the housekeeper had noticed in 3 weeks. Marcus Boone put in 2 long evenings in his office. A theft investigation meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant someone might finally look hard at Eleanor's household books. So Marcus redated things. Invoices massaged, entries shifted, until the pattern of quiet leaks in Eleanor's accounts no longer started 6 years back, where his hands were. It started 14 months back, the month a certain housekeeper moved in. He never accused Danielle of anything. He didn't have to. He just left a trail lying where the family's suspicion was already walking. And Marisol watched the temperature of the house, saw which way the ice was breaking, and made a choice. It cost her nothing but nerve, though it did cost her that. She stood at the top of the service stairs for a while first, listening. Then, one afternoon while Danielle was upstairs and Zoe was at school, She went down to the basement level and let herself into the housekeeper's apartment. Staff quarters had no locks worth the name. She was in and out in under 3 minutes, and what she left behind was tucked deep in the back of the closet, inside a rain boot, where a careless woman might hide a treasure and where a search would surely find one.
Not the brooch. Marisol didn't have the brooch. Nobody did. It was one of Eleanor's pieces all the same. A gold bracelet from the everyday jewelry box in the dressing room. A box Marisol had walked past 100 times ferrying Theo around the upstairs. Small enough that Eleanor wouldn't miss it. Real enough to do the job. 9 days after the empty safe, Celeste's security consultant recommended a voluntary search of staff quarters. Voluntary the way avalanches are voluntary. Danielle stood in her own doorway with Zoe close beside her and watched a stranger in a polo shirt handle the bottle cap collection with gloved hands, and she kept her face still, because a black woman in that hallway did not have the luxury of looking angry, and she knew the price list by heart. It took the man 11 minutes to find the boot. The bracelet came up into the light and the hallway went silent. Danielle heard her own voice from somewhere far away. "That's not mine. I've never seen that," and heard how it sounded, and watched Celeste's face close like a gate. Zoe stood against her mother's side, one bottle cap clenched in her hand. They didn't call the police. Celeste wanted it quiet. A scandal on the edge of the spring gala would embarrass Grant, and she had no appetite for turning a staff matter into a public scene. The family machine did what it does instead. By that evening, Danielle and Zoe's things were being moved to the garage annex, a drafty in-law unit over the carriage bays. Temporary. And Danielle held a letter giving her 2 weeks' notice, with a signature line acknowledging irregularities. She didn't sign. They moved her anyway. The next evening, Celeste came to the annex alone. No consultant, no Grant. She stood in the doorway in $400 shoes, looking tired more than anything, and held out a thick envelope. $25,000, she said. And a reference letter that says you left for family reasons. You leave quietly this weekend, you don't contact Eleanor, and this never touches your record or your daughter's life. I'd take it, Danielle. I would genuinely take it. Danielle looked at the envelope, and against her will, her mind started doing the math. $1,100 in checking. A car that didn't like cold mornings. Zoe's inhalers. First and last, and deposit on whatever came next. Groceries, the space heater running upstairs right now because the annex didn't hold warmth. $25,000 was the difference between falling and landing. Leave it on the table. I'll think about it. Celeste left it. That night, the envelope sat on the annex kitchen table like a lit window, and Danielle sat across from it, and she almost got up to get a pen. What stopped her was Zoe. Zoe came out of the bedroom in her pajamas, past bedtime, holding one of her bottle caps and turning it over in her fingers, and she asked the question children ask, the one that goes through armor like it isn't there. Whether, if they went away, anyone would be left to remind Miss Eleanor. Remind her of what, baby? Zoe said she didn't know, just stuff. That sometimes at cards, Eleanor dealt twice and didn't know it. And Zoe just said she liked the extra cards. That Eleanor held her hand really tight when they played now, like Grandma Ruth did. Like Grandma Ruth did. Zoe barely remembered Ruth. She'd been 4. But children keep what matters in their hands, not their heads. And Danielle broke. Quietly, at a kitchen table, with an envelope of surrender money in front of her, she told her daughter the thing she had never said out loud to a single living person. It didn't come out in order. It came out the way these things do, starting in the middle, doubling back. 6 years on the memory ward, and she'd been good at it. Families used to request her by name. She'd loved it, actually. That was the part nobody... She stopped, started over. Then Grandma Ruth got sick. 4 years nursing her mother alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, double shifts. The lifting. Your grandma was small, but the lifting still wrecks your back. Nobody tells you that part. And nights sleeping on the floor by Ruth's bed with a hand on her mother's arm so she'd wake if Ruth wandered.
Then, the last year. The money just ran out. It wasn't a choice. People call it a choice. The state facility with the buzzing hallway lights. Ruth's face in the window as Danielle drove away. The promise, every single visit. "I'm coming to get you, Mama. I just need one more paycheck." And then the phone call at 4:40 on a February afternoon, while Danielle was at work, mopping someone else's floor. Ruth had passed in a facility bed, in a shared room, with a stranger's television playing. Her daughter was 19 miles away. I promised myself that I would never again hand somebody I love over to strangers and drive away. Never again, Zoe. And Miss Eleanor, she stopped, pressed her thumb into the old spoon until it left a mark. Miss Eleanor's family doesn't even know yet that there's something to hand over. Zoe put her bottle cap on the table next to the envelope, like an answering bet. The next morning, before her shift, because unbelievably, insultingly, she was still expected to work her notice, Danielle walked into the main house, past Marisol's watching eyes, and set the envelope, sealed, unopened, on the desk in Celeste's study. "You can't buy it. The truth isn't for sale, and neither is my quiet."
The evidence was planted. The money was offered. Every easy way out. But Danielle still chose the truth.
2 weeks on the clock, a planted bracelet, a doctored ledger, and across the lawn in the West Wing, an old woman starting to surface from her fog, and beginning to feel in her bones that something in her house was very wrong. The system Danielle built was still running. That had been the whole design. 8 months earlier, sitting in that study at 11 at night, she'd built it for the person, not the paycheck. Labels Eleanor could read alone, a journal that lived in Eleanor's own drawer, anchors that didn't need a housekeeper standing next to them. So even with Danielle exiled to the garage annex and barred from the West Wing, the pieces kept working. The dated notepad, the vitamins organizer, which the cook kept setting out on Mrs. Whitlock's particular schedule without knowing what it really was, and the leather journal, where 8 months of days sat written down in a steady, looping hand. Eleanor, surfacing from the worst fog stretch of her life, began to read. She read it the way you'd read your own biography written by a stranger, with dread, and then with a slow, breaking gratitude. Every entry ended the same way, a habit Danielle had fallen into without thinking. The date, the weather, one line. You told Zoe the story about the Savannah warehouse. She loved it. You signed the charity papers at 10 a.m. Grant was pleased. Bad afternoon. Better by supper. You are all right. You are all right. Over and over, in the handwriting of a woman this house had just thrown over a carriage bay for theft. On a Tuesday morning, a good morning, 10 o'clock, her blade hours, Eleanor sat with that journal and did what she had built a company doing. She worked the problem. If her own hand had moved the brooch on a lost day, the system would have caught the edges of it somewhere. She went back to March. Gray Thursday. The morning Danielle had been downstairs with a feverish child. The entry that night was shorter than the others, with one line written carefully, without alarm, the way Danielle wrote everything. Hard morning alone. You'd been at your desk. Safe was open when I came up. I closed it. Ink on your fingers. You were all right by 2. Ink on her fingers. Eleanor sat very still. Then she went to her desk and did something no security consultant had thought to do, because no security consultant knew there was a lost morning to search. She went through her own stationery. In the second drawer, under a box of correspondence cards, was a pale blue envelope in her own handwriting. The strong version, addressed to no one, sealed. She opened it with a letter knife, and her hands were not steady. Inside was the emerald brooch, wrapped in a handkerchief, the $50,000 check, and a note in her own hand. For Danielle Carter, for Zoe's schooling. Before I forget that I wanted to, before I forget her. E.W. Eleanor sat with the envelope in her lap for a long time. The house was quiet. Somewhere below, the cook was running water. Then she picked up the telephone, and she did not call her son. The first call was to a private investigator her late husband had kept on retainer for 30 years, a gray, quiet man named Okafor. I want 6 years of my household accounts audited by Friday, not a whisper of it near Marcus Boone. A pause while he asked something practical. Yes, the originals. I'll have them to you tomorrow.
The second call was to the estate's security company, the one whose contract answered to her name, not Grant's, a detail everyone in that house had forgotten. She asked whether the service stairs camera on the basement level stored its footage, and for how long. 90 days, they told her. Pull the second week of March, all of it. Then she rang the main house and informed her son, in the voice that had ended board disputes for 40 years, that she was updating her will, that the family attorneys would come to the estate Friday evening, and that she expected everyone present. Everyone. Family, Boone, the nanny, the household. And Grant, the housekeeper, and her daughter as well. They are still on this property for 4 more days. I checked. Friday came down on the house unevenly. Celeste was certain the will was about her, that Eleanor had finally found the instrument for 18 years of disapproval, and spent the day choosing what to wear to her own sentencing. Marcus stayed calm on the surface while funds moved quietly underneath, a man shifting his weight toward the exit without appearing to stand up. Marisol pressed Grant's suits and let herself picture the household with her rival gone for good. Grant couldn't have named what he was feeling, because the word was dread, and it wasn't about money. He'd been noticing things for weeks. His mother repeating a story, the strange, new, particular schedule. Noticing and filing it away unopened, the way he filed away everything that required him to feel something in his own house. Danielle spent Friday packing boxes in the annex with her daughter. Nobody had told her the meeting was anything but her own ending. They gathered in the great room at 7. 2 attorneys with leather folders. The family arranged on sofas like a portrait. Marcus by the fireplace with his ledger smile. Marisol standing with Theo on her hip. A shield, if you were paying attention. Danielle and Zoe were shown in last, and left standing near the door, and Celeste wouldn't look at them. And Grant looked at them too long. Eleanor Whitlock walked in at 7 sharp, at the top of her evening strength, wearing the emerald brooch. Celeste stood halfway up. "Mother, where?" And Eleanor lifted one hand, and 40 years of authority came down on the room like weather. "Sit down, all of you. I have 3 things to say, and I've timed this meeting for the hour of my day when I am sharpest. You're about to learn why my days have hours now." She stood in front of the fireplace, one hand on the mantel, the other holding the leather journal, and she told them. The tea, the glasses in the refrigerator, the hallway. She stopped there briefly, and her jaw worked. My own bedroom. 40 years in this house, and I stood in my own hallway like a tourist. She named the diagnosis plainly, confirmed by her doctor at a private appointment in October, an appointment Danielle had driven her to, listed in the household calendar as a dress fitting. She watched her son's face come apart and did not stop. I have early-stage memory loss. It is progressing. And for 8 months, exactly one person under this roof knew. One.
Her eyes went around the room, unhurried. Not my son, who visited me like a holiday obligation. Not his wife. My housekeeper caught it. In 3 weeks, she built me handrails, notebooks, labels, a little girl's card games. Don't smile, Marcus. The card games were medicine. She managed my medications. She guarded my dignity like it was her own mother's. Her voice caught, one hairline crack, and reset. And when you accused her of robbing me, when you searched her child's belongings, she stood there and let you do it. Because defending herself meant breaking her promise to me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? So I will say it, in front of the attorneys, since she couldn't. Danielle Carter never took anything from this family. This family took from her. She laid the pale blue envelope on the coffee table. I moved the brooch. I signed that check. On a morning I lost, for her, for Zoe's education. And then I forgot my own kindness, and you built her a crime out of it. A short silence. I forgot my own kindness. Sit with that. I have to. That part is the disease, and I'll own it. The rest of what happened in this house, the disease doesn't get to own. People did that. She turned to the fireplace. Marcus? Marcus Boone's smile stayed up a half-second too long, like a sign swinging after the shop's already burned. Mr. Okafor finished the audit yesterday. 6 years, Marcus. He walked me through Delgado's winter contract, line by line. A pause, letting that sit. You can explain it to the attorneys yourself, or they can read you the total. Either way, and I want you to appreciate this, that is one number I am going to remember.
Marcus tried. For about 40 seconds, Marcus Boone tried. Duchess, with respect, household accounting is complicated, and given what you've just told us about your condition, yes, I wondered if you'd go there. She looked down at the index card in her hand. Not for effect, she needed it. She'd copied it out of the leather journal the night before, in her own handwriting, while the whole thing would still hold together in her head. Mr. Okafor. The gray, quiet man came in from the hallway with a folder and handed it, not to Eleanor, to the attorneys. Then Eleanor began, and it was not smooth. She had the shape of it on the card. A ground service vendor with no equipment and no employees. A mailing address that turned out to be a rented box 11 minutes from Marcus's condo. She lost the figure halfway through. 300 and... She stopped, checked the card. 312,000 over 6 years. She said 6 years twice. Nobody corrected her. That's a shared vendor account. Half the estate's on this lake. There's no equipment, the older attorney said, without looking up from the folder. There are no employees. Silence. Marcus opened his mouth and closed it again. Celeste was staring at the folder like it might move. The entries were redated. Slower now, because this was the part she had made herself practice. So 6 years of theft would look like 14 months, starting the month Danielle came. She had to stop there. Her hand found the pearls. You stole from me, all right? I forget things. You might have gotten away with it. A breath. But you pointed it at her. Marcus started something about loyalty, about 22 years, and got 4 words in before he seemed to hear himself. He looked at Grant. One last reflex, the fishing trips, all of it. And Grant stood up. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he walked to the door and opened it and stood holding it, looking at the floor. The attorneys will call you Monday. Go home, Marcus. He went. He passed Danielle and Zoe in the doorway, and he did not say superstar. Eleanor sat down. That was the first surprise for most of the room. She sat in the wingback by the fire and asked for water, and Danielle was already moving before anyone else had processed it. Eleanor drank half the glass, looked at her card again. Marisol. Marisol's arms tightened around Theo. Put him down, dear. He's asleep on his feet.
The footage was already on the attorney's laptop. Service stairs, basement level, second week of March. Marisol going down on an afternoon she had no reason to be down there, into the housekeeper's apartment, out again 90 seconds later. I went down for linens. The attorney read out the timestamp and the date, and Marisol stopped talking. The bracelet came from my everyday box. She was quieter now and slower. You've walked past it 100 times. She paused, and for a second she seemed to lose the thread entirely. Her eyes went somewhere past the fire. Then she came back and said the thing she had evidently decided she would say no matter what. You planted suspicion in a home that was already ready to believe it, Marisol. For a moment it looked like Marisol might argue. Her eyes went to Grant, quickly, once, and Grant looked at his shoes, and Celeste saw all of it. You could watch her seeing it. She didn't say a word. She sat very still and did some private arithmetic with the last 2 years, and her face changed and stayed changed. Marisol set Theo on the sofa, smoothed his hair once, and left. Nobody in that room ever agreed afterward on what the hair smoothing meant. Then it was family and the 2 people by the door. Eleanor looked at Celeste, and Celeste braced. 18 years of verdicts will train a body to do that. You owe Danielle an apology, but I have to go first, and I've been dreading it more than all the rest of tonight put together. She glanced at the card, then turned it face down on the arm of the chair because this part wasn't on it. 18 years I graded you. You weren't what I pictured, and I never once looked at what you were. A woman who came up hard, married into a family that made her prove it every day. She stopped, started again. In 1971, a woman did that to me, in a colder house than this one, and I swore I never would. And then I gave you 18 Thanksgivings of her. She was looking at the fire, not at Celeste. Some of this is mine, not the stealing, the rest of it. Celeste didn't move for a long moment. When she finally did, it wasn't graceful. She stood too fast, crossed the room, stopped in front of Danielle, and couldn't start. I didn't know about the ledgers, was what came out first, and she heard how it sounded and shut her eyes. I'm not saying that. Her hand pressed flat against her sternum. The envelope. When you handed it back sealed, I knew. A woman who took that brooch would have taken the money too. I knew it that same night. And I moved you over the garage anyway because being wrong was... She didn't finish it. I'm sorry. I don't know how to make that word big enough. Zoe, I'm sorry. Zoe, 8 years old, looked up at her and simply said it was okay. Then, after some digging in her pocket, she asked whether Celeste wanted a bottle cap, told her this one was orange, and that they were kind of lucky. Celeste took it and held it, and clearly had no idea what to do with it. A soda cap sitting in a manicured hand, and something in her face came loose. Grant made a sound and turned toward the window, and stayed there a while with his back to his family, which was the most honest thing he did with his face that night.
Then the will. It was shorter than anyone feared. The company stays in family hands, Grant under a supervised structure. And he took that without a word, which said something. Celeste into the family trust as a principal, effective that night. A funded education trust for Zoe Carter. And the $50,000 check from March re-signed in front of witnesses. Eleanor's hand shook a little on the second signature. She finished it anyway and set the pen down harder than she meant to. Then she looked up at Danielle. I have a proposal, and you're going to hate the title. Estate, she checked the card. Estate manager. The whole house runs through you. Everything Boone touched. Live in, the West Wing suite, a real salary. The lawyers have the number. I don't anymore. A small, dry smile at her own expense. Then the smile went away. The fog is going to win, Danielle. You know that better than anyone in this room. I'm asking you to walk it with me anyway. Nobody spoke. Zoe looked up at her mother. Danielle's hand went to Zoe's shoulder first, then into her apron pocket, where it closed around the spoon. Her mother's spoon. A facility hallway. A phone call at 4:40 on a February afternoon.
She had a sentence about that. She'd been carrying it for 4 years, and standing there, she found she didn't need to say it out loud to anyone but herself. She let the breath go. Conditions. Her voice was low and a little rough. The family learns the disease, all of you. The stages. What a bad afternoon looks like. So it's never one person's secret again. Done. And Saturday's stay. Cards. Gin rummy, obviously. Danielle looked at Grant. She didn't say the third condition out loud. She just looked at him, long enough. Tuesdays, to the floor. And Fridays, I'll come. You'll lose. And Zoe, from her spot by her mother, said that he really would. And for a second, not long, but real. That room sounded like a family. It wasn't fixed. That should be said plainly. Celeste and Danielle were careful with each other for a long time. Polite, then cordial, then over years, something close to friends, though neither of them ever used the word. Grant missed a Tuesday in the first month and had to walk back in the following week and sit down at the card table with no excuse ready, and that may have been the hardest thing anyone ever watched him do. And the fog came. Slower than they'd feared, but it came. There were afternoons Eleanor raged at Danielle and couldn't have told you why. Mornings she asked for people 40 years dead, and Danielle had to decide, again and again, how much truth was kindness that day. One January she was afraid of the sunroom, a whole week, and no one ever learned what she saw in there. But there were Saturdays too, years of them. Cards, butterscotch, bottle caps lined up along the table's edge like a currency only 2 people honored. Near the end, when most of the names had gone under the water, 2 stayed up longest. Zoe and Danielle, which Eleanor, in her last winter, had worn down to a single word. Mine. That house had every kind of money. What it needed came in carrying a breakfast tray, with an old silver spoon in an apron pocket. A woman who kept looking at someone who was disappearing, and kept seeing a whole person. Nobody in that family had managed it before her. Not for Eleanor, not for the housekeeper they'd been so quick to accuse. They learned it late, and it cost them, and they would tell you it was worth what it cost. Whether Danielle would put it that simply, after the hard afternoons, after all of it, is her own business. She stayed. That part is simple.
That's the story. If Danielle's courage stayed with you, subscribe to Mallory Coleman Stories. Tell us in the comments, someone who quietly holds another person together.